typically, especially kids with ADHD, are really bright. They're really smart. They're really bright, and they can be super successful, but without the proper supports and accommodations until you've got to those roots. So you have to put some supports in place before you can fix any of the underlying causes, because if you don't get that the self-esteem part taken care of, you're going to be fighting a constant battle with them.
Welcome to the Soaring Child podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host. Welcome to the Soaring Child podcast, the show that gives hope and answers to parents of children with ADHD who are looking for alternative, natural, and effective means of helping them learn to thrive at home, at school, and in life. Children with ADHD deserve to soar like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host, and today we're talking with Tara Hunkin. Tara is a functional nutritional therapy practitioner, certified GAPS practitioner, mother, and founder of My Child Will Thrive. She's an author and host of the Autism, ADHD, and SPD Summit. Tara has been where you and I have been, searching for explanations and solutions for her daughter. Doctor's visits left her with more questions than answers, and she was forced to do research and find her own way to help her child. Now, Tara's daughter is now thriving. She's 18 years old, and she's succeeding in and out of school. Tara now supports parents of children with neurodevelopmental disorders struggling to find the right combination of treatments and therapies through educating and coaching them so that they can get the best results for their child while saving time, money, and effort. Now it's time to welcome Tara Hunkin to the Soaring Child. Hi, Tara.
Well, hi. Thank you so much for having me here. I love what you're doing.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me, and I'm super excited to get started. Now, I before we do dig in, I want our listeners to really get to know you a little bit. Can you tell us your story and what brought you to this specific career path?
Absolutely. I think it probably will sound very similar to what many of the people that are listening and yourself went through, which is that my daughter was struggling and from developmentally early on. So the first time with her was sort of delayed motor skills and delayed speech. And it wasn't that she wasn't making progress. She just wasn't making progress on the right milestone path. So when we started down you start talking, go to the well baby visits, and they say either, yes, this is a concern, or no, you should just wait. So we went through all that process. And as we started to meet with specialists after specialists, so speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, eventually pediatric developmental doctors, and everything else. And we got some good and helpful advice, but the prognosis and what their expectations of her were acceptable to me. And I just knew in my gut there was more to it than what they were giving us to do. And unfortunately for us, we were doing this, as you'd mentioned. She's 18 now. Actually, she turns 18 at the time of this recording. She turns 18 next week, and which is pretty exciting and scary all at the same time.
It sure is.
But so we went through all of those things, but we weren't getting the answers that we wanted to. And unfortunately, like I was saying, is that because it was 18 years ago, the internet was in its infancy, really, in terms of this level of information. So it took a number of years of her life, and we kept on working at all the different therapies, be it speech or OT, and making some progress, but never actually, she was losing ground constantly. Mm-hmm. So I kept on digging, and eventually came across when she was in grade 2 at that point, came across Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride's Gut and Psychology Syndrome book, which is a diet-based intervention, healing the gut and using nutrients to rebalance the gut. And that was sort of the tipping point. It was the first time I'd found something that was outside of everything else I was being told. And partly it was because the diagnosis for her wasn't the typical path. It was, we've got a speech delay, and we didn't really even get a diagnosis of a specific thing. In her case, the first one that came was dyspraxia. For those of you who don't know, that's a developmental coordination disorder, but that can impact everything from your ability to do fine motor skills, like learning to use a pair of scissors. She had to be taught in a very step-by-step motion, climbing a ladder, to go down a slide, just placement of feet. It can be also even the placement of her tongue. So that's what was interfering with her speech progress. But what we didn't know at that time is all those developmental milestones actually, and how that was causing this cascade of effects in terms of development, in terms of learning, attention, auditory processing. It impacts everything. So getting a diagnosis was great for Googling, but for us, it wasn't until I realized that it was really a holistic approach that we had to do until we started to make progress and look at the root causes and dig into those, and then help to change that trajectory, and let her catch up developmentally. I don't like the term, but we were trying to get her back at or close to her peers in different developmental areas.
What age did you start, that more holistic approach? How old was she?
Yeah. So I found Dr. Natasha's book, and I've said this before, is that I just literally, I read it and laughed out loud. I'm like, there's no way my child will ever eat this, or I'll ever be able to do this. So I actually put it aside for a long time because it looked incredibly hard. Mm-hmm. But I had a breaking point about 2 years after that. We were, at that time, we'd found some therapies that we were doing that were really working for her from a learning perspective, but again, still not making as much progress as we wanted to. She had a lot of sensory challenges as well. Like getting her dressed in the morning was just a fight, and it was so uncomfortable for her. So finding the right clothes, and parents will probably, the eating was, could be challenging as well, because textures of foods and sounds associated with doing that was always challenging. So it took me a while, but I finally just went, there has to be, her life can't be this uncomfortable all the time. That might be hard, but this is going to be way harder for her lifelong, and for us as a family, if we don't take some difficult steps and really look at it holistically, and just dig in and do the hard work that it was going to take to, even if there's a leap of faith with something like that too, because the thing is, it's really hard. It's something that you might have to make a bunch of sacrifices in order to actually implement. But it's a leap of faith that it's actually going to result in better health outcomes ultimately. And in our case, and I think in most cases it does, it's just, you have to get there mentally in order to implement that kind of.
You definitely have to be ready to make this change. And that was the same for us when we got to that point with my son. You have to be at that point of just not knowing what to do next. For us, we were in a state of pain in our family life, and I would dread every day waking up. And so we were at that point, and we did it. And we were successful, just like you. And so that obviously brought you to the specific career path that you're in now. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It is. So ultimately what I did was, because I had always had an interest in nutrition, but not in the way that I ended up, practicing or teaching about nutrition for our children, just in the overall health and wellness space. And I had a lot of wrong things that I now know are not correct in terms of what makes a good nutritious, healthy sort of approach. But so ultimately what I did is I went through, I had been teaching myself really everything, reading everything I get my hands on from a nutritional standpoint. At that point, that was the initial part. And when I did that, I had friends that were just saying, you should really just become a nutritionist. Like, why aren't you doing this? Because my background actually is in finance. And so
secret between you and me, in a past life, I was an accountant. So I'm right there with you too.
So it was, and then, ultimately when I started to do this work, really what I found that I was good at was coming up with systems and processes to help parents manage the overall understanding and care that they have to do and how to make decisions of what's the right next step. So ultimately I went through and did a functional nutritional therapy practitioner program. And I also did the GAPS, certified GAPS program with Dr. Natasha. I actually went to England because I really wanted to do it in person with her.
Wow.
So I went and did that. And that was back in 2013. And we had already implemented that GAPS and had been doing it for a while. And I'll tell you, I had done some things wrong. And when I say wrong, I had made some mistakes in terms of how I implemented it that could have made it easier on my kids at the time when we were doing it, because we did it as a whole family. That was the other thing I decided really early on, in order to make it easier on the kids, is that we all had to do it.
Yes,
because otherwise, how do you justify one person eating one way or another way, and also just to eliminate all the distractions within the house. So we all did it together, and those changes we implemented across the board, and everybody ate the same way for not just therapeutic diets, but as we transitioned out of that, that's the way we lived in our house until my kids were teenagers. And then they started to make some of their own choices, which aren't always the best. And we have to live with that.
Yes, no, we are going through that stage ourselves. Yeah. So that's fantastic. And exactly the same with me. When you get into it and, have a child with challenges, and then you see them come out of that, how can you not share that? How can you not dive deeper into that? So what do you think is the most challenging part for parents once they've learned their child has ADHD or sensory processing or any of those neurodevelopmental disorders?
Well, I think that, one of the first things is, when I think about it, is that there's a lot of stigma still attached to some of the diagnoses, although it's becoming less and less, because a lot of people that sort of claim that that's their issue and in terms of when they're having struggles as an adult. So there's less of that. But in terms of and when you talk about social settings and settings in the school, there's still a lot of stigma around it. But also, if you've gotten to the point where you had to go through the whole process of getting diagnosed, you likely are having significant challenges with your child. And there's a lot of people around them in either your family circle or their social circle or their school circle that already have made some judgments about them and their personality. And I think, especially with ADHD, one of the toughest things is that the self-esteem drops off, I think, the most. And they're very hard on themselves and also don't believe in themselves anymore. So
did you know that that kids with ADHD hear 20,000 more negative messages than their peers a year? So, that self-confidence drop-off is huge. And so we've got to fill their buckets. Us as parents have to fill their buckets with all those positivities.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it's also working hard to get those people around them. So in those circles, their teachers, your friends, your family, whoever is going to spend time around them that could ever to get them to the point of understanding what is going on with them and how that's impacting them, and getting that point across that we have to be so careful It's that fine line between correcting behavior that's inappropriate and making them feel terrible about themselves because we're constantly correcting them. And it's a tough one. So I think that like the first thing after diagnosing, and ideally way before that, but it just depends on when you start to learn these things. And we can never, you can't beat yourself up about when you actually finally understand even yourself. But the first thing I would say is that, and as part of that, because you've got a diagnosis now, and even before that you can get an IEP for your child at school, so an individual education plan, and you should do that because whatever we can do to support them if they are in school already, to make sure, and that a lot of people are really afraid of that too. They shouldn't be afraid of that because IEPs are there because typically, especially kids with ADHD are really bright. They're really smart. They're really bright and they can be super successful, but without the proper supports and accommodations until you've got to those roots. So you have to put some supports in place before you can fix any of the underlying causes, because if you don't get that the self-esteem part taken care of, you're going to be fighting a constant battle with them. So these are the things I wish I'd know. We did those things, but there's sometimes we did, and sometimes we didn't do enough of that. So having those supports in place so they can be as successful as possible while you're working on everything, I think is really, really, really important. And then if you want to get to the root causes, which people that are here want to get to those roots, we have to start taking a daily journal. And when I say a journal, I'm not talking necessarily, or you can add that if you want, your thoughts and feelings about things, because that's always helpful too. But I'm talking about tracking some of the data so that you can identify what the roots of causes are. So that's things like what are they eating? How much are they drinking, and what are they drinking every day? Do you noticing any moods or behaviors associated with those points in time or at different points in time in the day? How much sleep are they getting? How much exercise are they getting at points of time today? And you just want to, and how their digestion is performing, which basically the output of that is, are they pooping? And what does the poop look like?
Yes.
And how often are they pooping?
The Bristol stool chart, if anyone doesn't know.
Yeah. You want to aim for the 4s.
Yes.
It's not when you want to aim for 10. So it's tracking that data that's going to give you the best information to then take and interpret with, ideally with a qualified practitioner if you can. But so that you can decide what your best next steps are for you and your child based on where they're at right at that point in time.
Because everyone's different, aren't they? And everyone has different problems. And just going a little bit deeper into that, it's obviously very overwhelming when you're trying to figure out that best course of action. Yes. Knowing that you personally have interviewed many professionals in this space, especially on your summits and your podcast, I would love you to talk a little bit about some of the different approaches families can take. Can you dive deep into that a little bit?
Yes. So there are a lot of approaches, and that's where it gets really overwhelming. But fundamentally, I'd say that, my belief is after interviewing all these people, doing all the research that I've done, there's some foundational things we all have to work on. And one of them is diet. That goes hand in hand with digestion, because if you can feed them all you want, but if they aren't digesting it well, then they're not getting the nutrients, and they're going to have gut dysfunction and possibly dysbiosis and leaky gut. And that can cause a whole realm of problems as well, because there's a gut-brain connection.
Sure is.
We want to look at their daily environment. So, environmental toxins. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can there are things you can eliminate or substitute other things for in your daily environment or your child's daily environment around cleaning products and what shampoo you're using with them and all those types of things that we may never have thought of before. They can make a big difference. They all sort of collect in terms of all these little things you can do. and changes you can make. So
I will just say something on that, and you're exactly right. In my program, obviously working with kids with ADHD, we have 2 programs, and one focuses on food and cleaning up your environment.
Yeah.
And I would find that with all the families that we work with, 50% of the kids that we work with, we do those basic things first. And they don't need to go further. They don't need to go and find what are those underlying root causes or those hidden stresses. So that's a really, really good point. There are some low-hanging fruit that people can focus on to start.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure this is part of what you cover in that course. I mean, one of the perfect examples of that is something like phenols and salicylates. So certain types of foods that cause ADHD-like behaviors. And when they're eliminated, which there's two steps to that, but you can eliminate them and get rid of the behaviors, but a lot of them are also very healthy foods. So you want to be able to put them back in. So then you work on that root cause, which a lot of them is poor sulfation, which we won't get into all that type of stuff, but that's part of the detox process. So again, removing those toxicants that from their environment helps support, so their detox pathways don't have to work as hard as well. So it's that whole interconnected piece, but just by looking at those 2 things that you do in that introductory course, it is amazing how many people will find, especially the kids with milder symptoms. When we say mild, it may not be mild to you and your environment or your child, but it can make a huge difference. Right away. Definitely. It's one of the reasons why I think the Feingold diet is so popular in the ADHD community, because it has such a fantastic impact really quickly.
Definitely. And so what are some of those sort of more, what are some of the paths that you can go down once you've done diet, but know you need to go deeper? What are some of the approaches that families can take? Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I would do right along with that is actually right away is looking at primitive reflexes. So there's a number of studies that are out there. And if you aren't familiar with primitive reflexes are reflexes that the babies are born with. And they typically, depending on which one it is, there's a number of them, but they typically are they're called integrated, or they change into a different type of reflex by 18 months. But each one of them has a different milestone in terms of when that reflex is supposed to integrate and disappear. Those reflexes are there to help with, they're primitive in the sense that they come from the brainstem, so they have no control or thought or control. They're a reflex. That makes sense. So they're reflexive in nature. So they're not something they can control objectively. An example of one would be the Moro reflex, which is startle reflex. And again, this is a reflex that if you ever see the baby, when babies get startled, they all of a sudden they'll raise their hands and they kind of have that, they take a gasp in. And these reflexes are ones that are defensive ones for, again, for infant survival. There are reflexes that help with with vaginal births. There are reflexes that help with so many different things. But the ones that have been tied, the Moro actually reflex has been tied. So if you have a child that startles really easily, it's likely they've retained their Moro reflex. When a primitive reflex is retained, the proper developmental cascade in terms of how the brain is supposed to develop does not happen. Okay. So it's really important that we look to see, do we have retained primitive reflexes? They can be easily remediated at home with simple exercises. That's the great thing.
And how would a family determine that their child has retained reflexes?
Yeah. So the practitioners that typically assess for that, they're unfortunately, so at well baby visits, you'll see that that pediatricians will sometimes look for them, but they look for them to be present at certain times. They aren't necessarily looking for them to go away, and they don't test them all. But a well-informed pediatric OT, so occupational therapists, sometimes do those, and they may not know and remediate all of them though. But functional neurologists or developmental neurologists, so that's a a discipline that's come out of chiropractic, but it's a whole nother doctorate level work.
Yes.
And they are very well versed. So the person that I came across when I was doing this again, doing the research, and where I came across was Dr. Robert Milillo, and he has a book called Disconnected Kids. And he has a whole list of how you can assess your own child in there and how you can remediate them. So you can actually go through and assess that. So when you ask them in terms of the experts that I've talked to, one of the things that I've been fortunate enough to do, because I found him, and then actually that's when we had done the dietary interventions, like we had talked about, we had done gut healing, I'd done all of the things, but we were kind of stuck. We had made some progress, but we were and the kids were so much healthier. We got rid of the dark circles under the eyes, got rid of a lot of the digestive problems and all the things that create. So we made many improvements and we're making progress, and that was great. But until we did neuro rehab type work, and there's many different, that comes in lots of forms. It can come through auditory therapy, vision therapy, movement therapy. There's a wonderful device called, and that works very well with children with ADHD as well, called the interactive metronome, vibration, smell. There's a whole, so with functional neurology, they usually use a multimodal approach to impact and rebalance the brain and redevelop the neural pathways as they should have. So
it's very complicated.
Yeah, it is really complicated, but it's actually the great part about it is that if you just start with the primitive reflexes, which are not complicated, and there are online resources for online courses, there are a number of people that you can go to, and Dr. Milillo's book that you can pick up. You can do them at home, and it can be really easy and cost effective, and they're not hard to do with your kids. They're actually not that difficult. So that would be another major thing that I now recommend everybody looks into.
Great. No, that's great. And obviously there's a lot more other things you can go deeper in, but we're probably not going to have time to discuss them all today. So we might just keep moving on. But maybe you'll have to come back next time to finish off all of those different approaches that families can take. But what do you find are the core tools? And I know you touched on it a little bit earlier in, writing down that food diary, that poop diary, all of that. But what are some of those, core tools and resources parents should take advantage of once they've received a diagnosis?
Yeah. So one of the things that I learned, I also had the honor of going through the Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs. They have a training, and one of the original instructors there, Dr. Sidney Baker, he's a Yale MD that realized that really it comes down to the individual and the individual child, and he's been treating autism in particular for many, many years. And so the first thing is always the medical history. So we all dread the millions of forms and all those details that are collected, but that information is total gold. Dr. Baker spends an hour and a half to 2 hours with new patients when he was he's in his 80s now. He's not practicing anymore, but he spent an enormous amount of time because those details matter. So I always recommend that when you keep a copy of every intake form you ever are asked to fill out, and also so you can give the consistent information, because we start to forget. I did. And you have another child, and then you get them mixed up. And when did they have the infection and have some antibiotics? And those details matter. Your prenatal history matters. Your during your pregnancy matters. The delivery matters. All those things matter in terms of really getting to the roots of what's going on for your child, so you can find where to start and what to do next. So then collecting that daily journal, and then I also created this tool because every time I went to a new practitioner and you take on a new protocol, I found sometimes we didn't have that tough conversation about what can we really expect from what we're doing. So So it's to track, you need to ask, what are we trying to achieve by doing this, whatever it is we're doing specifically? How are we going to measure that? Is there a test to measure it? Is there objective, or is it going to be subjective? How long are we doing this before we're looking to see if we're making progress? Like, so you're not sitting around thinking that it's going to be 2 weeks when it's going to be 6 months. All of this is about setting your expectations. When your child becomes involved in these conversations and decisions, your child's expectations, the people around them, their expectations about how this is going to go. So you get buy-in on all levels. I find the more we understand why we're doing something, how long we're going to do it for, and how we know if we're being successful at it, the better we all implement those things and we can really get it going. So that's another tool. I mentioned this, I have a free toolkit where all these things, like they're just PDFs that you can fill in and track all this information. Tracking the information is really, really important. And practitioners that are good at what they do will love it.
We will drop the link in the comments below where you can actually find and download that tool guide. So that's fantastic, Tara, for sharing that. And I think that's a really, really good approach, because you don't know, you've never been down this path before. You don't know how long gut healing takes. You don't know how long it'll take to see results when you go on a gluten-free diet. So I think that those are some really, really wonderful questions for families to ask when they start a new approach or a new protocol, so they can adjust everyone's expectations. Now, from your experience, do you think parents need to address ADHD from a lot of different angles to be successful and see progress from a natural standpoint?
I think that it's unusual that there's one silver bullet. So as much as we like to think there is one thing that's going to make all the difference, there may be one thing for your child that makes the most difference out of all the things you do, but there typically is always going to be several things you're going to need to do in order to make that, to make the needle move the most and the fastest and be permanent in nature as well. So yeah, unfortunately, we end up doing all the things, but I would recommend that you start with the ones that your program teaches people how to do first, because if you don't do those things, the other things won't work as well.
Exactly. And that's what I say. It's like you can't supplement your way out of a bad diet. And that's why I always say, we ask people when we speak to them, what's your diet like? Where are you at with that? And if they haven't even done any diet changes at all, we suggest they start there, because when you go deeper and you go and do more complicated protocols and gut healing and all of that, there's a lot of things involved. And if you have to do that while adjusting diet, it's very overwhelming. I like to ask that question to people, just to hear what they think. From my point of view, firstly, I will say diet is the foundation of everything. If you don't have a solid foundation, when you're building a house, your house will fall down. And the body's the same. But also, all of those other things won't work. But I think the next stage is reducing inflammation in the body. And once you reduce inflammation in the body, a lot of these other modalities like chiropractic care and all of those other things, neurofeedback, will work better than if you just went to them first. So, I'm very much a preacher of diet first, then reducing inflammation in the body by finding those root causes for sure. Well, Tara, what are your final words of wisdom as a practitioner and obviously as a mum of a child with a neurodevelopmental disorder for families listening that are just starting out on this journey for their child?
So I'd say the first thing is don't beat yourself up, because I think a lot of parents, especially when we start looking for those root causes and digging into that history and everything, you start to go, oh, if I'd only this or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're doing what you need to do now. And that's just information. It's not about judging what we've done. The other thing is is to give yourself some grace in terms of how you go about doing this. Everybody is different. We all have different tolerances and abilities and time and financial resources and support systems. So you got to figure out what works best for you and your family. But the bottom line is don't give up and think that it won't work. It will. It may take you some time to figure out what works best for your child, but it will work. It just, it takes persistence. And if you track the information and do all that, it probably will take less time and persistence because you'll figure it out faster. But it does always take persistence, and it isn't an overnight fix. It's just not going to be an overnight fix. And anybody that tells you that is, I say you've got to run the other way and go find someone else because
agreed. But on the same side, going straight to medication's not an overnight fix either. You'll find yourself adjusting, increasing, adding in new medications, and so none of it is that overnight fix, and you've got to be prepared for that.
And what I just want to add, because that's a good point to that, is that whatever your choices are too, like everybody knows that there's sometimes where parents, there's sometimes we have to make compromises and do things we don't want to do in order to make life settle. So I know Agreed. lots of parents with children with autism. There's no judgment. I'm sure that's the way you do things. We want to figure out what's going to work for them long term. Yep. And we know medication won't work long term because they develop a tolerance to it. So even if you think that you're comfortable with medication, it won't work forever. So you need to figure that out, because as they become adults and if they've developed a tolerance for the medication, then they're going to really struggle even more. So, but
every family's got to choose the right path for them. Yeah,
you got to choose the right path for you and your child, because you don't know where, from a mental health standpoint, that child is at that point in time. So sometimes we have to make compromises too.
Yeah, very, very, very good point to end on. Thank you, Tara. Can you tell the listeners where they can find out more information about you and what you have to offer?
Absolutely. So the best place is at mychildwillthrive.com. And there we have lots of articles and other resources. And the toolkit that I was mentioning is at mychildwillthrive.com/toolkit. So
fantastic. Well, we'll drop those links below as well. But thank you so much, Tara. It was a pleasure having you today. And I can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you. And like I said, I'm so glad you're doing this. It's such a great thing.
Fantastic. Thank you. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at adhdthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.